From tanks breaking through the front lines at Cambrai in 1917, through the internet born of the Cold War technological race, to today's battlefields where drones and artificial intelligence draw a new map of warfare. Human history is a history of military innovations. Imagine Silicon Valley of the 1950s, not as the cradle of social media, but as a forge for spy plane software and cruise missile chips. Think of Ukraine, where mass production of 4 million drones annually creates a new reality, in which individual battles can be decided with a single click. Behind the facade of conflicts, a struggle is unfolding today between defense industry giants and new players. Palantir, whose value increased by 300% in 2024, exceeds the combined capitalization of the rest of the American defense sector. Valued at $28 billion, Anduril defeats offers from Lockheed or Boeing in Pentagon tenders, while European Helsing, worth 5 billion euros, creates precision massive combat drones. Is it these startup outsiders who are shaping the future of war? We stand on the threshold of a revolution. Artificial intelligence enters the battlefield. Unmanned vehicles replace soldiers, and technologies defined as dual use blur the line between peace and war. All this in a world where the geopolitical balance of power is once again becoming multipolar. Welcome to the 20s Report. Consider leaving a like if you enjoyed the video to aid the algorithm. The military technology landscape is rapidly transforming, with Silicon Valley startups challenging traditional defense giants. Palantir's value surged 300% in 2024, while Anduril now outbids industry veterans for Pentagon contracts. As AI enters the battlefield and drones replace conventional weapons, these innovations create new investment opportunities. In this era of technological warfare and shifting market valuations, having the right financial tools is essential. XTB Investing app, the partner of this episode, offers everything you need to effectively manage your finances. With access to over 4,800 shares and ETFs from around the world, which you can buy without commission up to a monthly turnover of 100,000 euros, plus analysis from a team of experts and an intuitive platform, XTB helps you navigate these dynamic markets. And if you feel you lack crucial knowledge, at XTB you will find a free educational package. Check out the XTB offer by clicking the link in the description. By doing so, you support the development of this channel. Remember that investing involves risk. Since the dawn of history, war and technology have formed an inseparable bond. Those who first introduced innovations to the battlefield gained an advantage that often determined the fate of entire civilizations. It should be emphasized that numerous technologies initially developed for armed forces eventually had a strong impact on improving economic development and societal prosperity. One can therefore speak of a close relationship, frequently resembling interdependence, between the development of military and civilian technologies. Often the outcomes of individual battles or wars were decided through the appropriately rapid use and adaptation of innovative technology, which complicated the opponent's orientation on the battlefield, forcing adjustments to their tactics. The mass deployment of new technologies in the absence of appropriate countermeasures frequently allowed for shortening the duration of battles or conflicts, which translated into reduced personnel and material losses. One example from 20th century history is the British offensive at Cambrai in November 1917, when the British employed tanks on a mass scale for the first time, achieving a limited breakthrough on the front line. Eventually, tanks became one of the most important assets for the Entente, which in 1918, thanks to a new approach to maneuver warfare, managed to break the stalemate on the front. Tanks proved to be a revolution that forever ended the era of cavalry, a formation that had dominated battlefields for thousands of years. This is a classic example of how a single innovation can completely change the rules of the game. The Great War initiated many other trends in warfare, such as the use of chemical weapons, which prompted frantic searches for appropriate protective measures for soldiers. From post-Cold War history, one can recall both Gulf Wars, where coalition forces, led by the USA, confirmed the importance of information superiority, obtained through new reconnaissance means. Throughout the entire history of military science, a consistent challenge in utilizing new technology has been translating tactical success into strategic achievement. Analyzing the historical context more broadly, the second half of the 19th century during the Industrial Revolution witnessed significant technological progress that improved transportation and communication systems. The proliferation of railways and the innovation of the telegraph changed not only the global economy, but also the conduct of warfare. The use of steam in industrial processes also dramatically increased the scale of military production, which helped increase the size of armies. The steam engine also ended the era of sail, changing the face of warfare at sea, as well as commerce. Importantly, conflicts often proved to be catalysts for technological development, as during the American Civil War or the Crimean War, which also brought breakthroughs in the field of medicine. By revolutionizing the method of troop transport, railways influenced the pace of progress at the operational level, contributing to the historical victories of Bismarck's Prussia in the second half of the 19th century. The Prussians noticed the potential of the new means of transport as early as the 1840s, when they used it for mass troop deployment to Kraków to suppress an uprising. For subsequent decades, until the widespread motorization of armed forces, rail transport often determined the operational planning process, the best example being the German Schlieffenplan before World War I. Railways remain a crucial element of military logistics to this day, as demonstrated by the war in Ukraine, and the dependence of both armies on a constant supply of equipment and ammunition. Throughout the turbulent 20th century, two worldwide wars, combined with the tense period of the Cold War, created optimal conditions for the development of military technologies. The strategic needs of Western Bloc states helped finance innovations that led to the proliferation of personal computers and the Internet, which originated in the Pentagon-coordinated ARPANET project. Another example of revolutionary technology that improved reconnaissance and weapons precision was GPS, which formed the foundation of American military successes in the post-Cold War period. In summary, military technologies beyond providing operational advantages can eventually lead to a broader adaptation of a given solution in the civilian sphere, which often leads to further refinement of particular aspects of the technology. One of the best examples is the personal computer or semiconductor sector, which for decades determined American technological supremacy. Back in the 1950s, at its inception, Silicon Valley was primarily engaged in producing reconnaissance software for spy planes or chips used in cruise missiles. Beyond multi-billion investments in breakthrough technologies, one should remember the continuous improvement of solutions used for many decades. A good example here is the space and rocket industry, where great hopes are associated with hypersonic missiles, which represent the next stage in the development of precision weapons. These first appear in rocket form during World War II. This weaponry ultimately became a symbol and one of the main elements of conventional and strategic arsenals during the Cold War. Currently, the great military powers, led by Russia, the USA, and China, are working on various variants of hypersonic missiles. The situation is similar regarding the countering of a broad spectrum of air attack means, from the aforementioned hypersonic weapons to drones. In this field, laser or microwave weapons possess exceptionally high potential, representing a distinctly cheaper alternative compared to current anti-aircraft measures. However, we should have no illusions. In the context of the coming years, the progressive automation of vehicles will play a major role in both civilian and military spheres. Unmanned systems will revolutionize battlefields, replacing soldiers in the most dangerous missions, introducing new reconnaissance methods, or serving as self-sufficient and more cost-effective offensive means. Drones, as in contemporary conflicts, will be used for both reconnaissance and fire support, particularly at the tactical level, serving as substitutes or complements to the other traditional systems, such as artillery or expensive precision missiles. The trend toward widespread adoption of unmanned vehicles is confirmed by the next-generation aerial and ground vehicle projects, such as the European FCAC and MGSC supported by unmanned units, which will increase both survivability and firepower of entire systems. Following unmanned vehicles, that is hardware, autonomous software, artificial intelligence will also follow. Artificial intelligence changes the rules of the game. It allows for the creation of autonomous weapon systems that react faster than humans and make decisions with precision unattainable for human operators. The development of AI will also facilitate the automation of unmanned vessels and enable more efficient target acquisition in conditions of interference, or the development of more effective forms of loitering munitions, for example in the form of drone swarms. Ethical questions naturally arise. Should we allow machines to decide matters of life and death? This is a dilemma that inhibits some innovations, but pressure exerted by conflicts, such as the war in Ukraine, constantly pushes these boundaries. Simultaneously, the course of current conflicts, such as the war in Ukraine, indicates rapid progress in this area, driven mainly by the need for improvisation. Artificial intelligence can also be utilized in advanced monitoring and data system analysis, which are crucial in threat detection, risk assessment, and faster real-time decision-making. The progressive development of AI contributes to the emergence of modern combat and control systems, which are key to coordinating military actions in the era of multi-domain operations. Another area that should clearly benefit from AI development is military simulators, which will help reduce the exploitation of military vehicles and equipment. Among many other technologies, AI will be key to gaining technological advantage in future conflicts, allowing for better utilization of the information sphere and more effective use of fire assets. The importance of this technology is recognized by representatives of the traditional defense industry, who are often skeptical of innovations. Rheinmetall CEO Armin Peppinger recently admitted that in the near future, AI will play an important role, particularly in the battlefield command process, as well as in the identification of enemy units. All that leads to one thing. Ukraine has become the largest laboratory for military innovations in decades, where technologies that seemed like distant future just a few years ago are being tested in real time. The Russian-Ukrainian war is constantly evolving, and adaptation to changing conditions is a key condition for triumph at both tactical and strategic levels. The most important conclusions from the war so far concern the proliferation of expandable and inexpensive precision air attack means and unmanned vessels for reconnaissance and combat purposes. What shocks conflict observers most is the mass production of drones. Ukraine produces up to 4 million annually, and it is not state defense conglomerates behind this success, but the private sector, which has rapidly adapted to wartime needs. Another important observation is the significant improvement in quality and increase in quantity of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets (ISR), which have seriously hampered force concentration, particularly for armored units, in a way explaining the stalemate persisting on many sections on the front. The war in Ukraine is not only a physical battle, but also an invisible fight in the electromagnetic spectrum. Whoever controls radio waves has the advantage. Therefore, Rusi analysts note that the conflict has proven how great an impact electronic warfare has on operational activities, and how difficult it is to obtain a lasting advantage in the electromagnetic sphere. This is particularly evident in the use of drones, which require constant updates. Also striking is the low survivability of armored vehicles and the invaluable role of air defense, not only for the armed forces, but also from the perspective of maintaining resilience and efficient functioning of the entire economy. Therefore, countering inexpensive air attack means, such as drones or loitering munitions, in a way that encompasses all elements of critical infrastructure, remains a significant challenge. Here, as in many other domains of conflict, the private sector may prove invaluable. A number of military solutions used in Ukraine have been effectively implemented precisely due to the involvement of the civilian component. An important example is the mass production of drones, which in Ukraine is estimated to reach up to 4 million units annually. There is no doubt that the Russian-Ukrainian war has significantly accelerated the development of military technologies, forcing the adaptation of armed forces and thus providing fertile conditions for testing new solutions. The conflict has also proven to be a turning point for supporting defense technologies through a dramatic increase in defense spending among alliance countries and interest from the private market. Indeed, it should be kept in mind that for the last 3 decades following the end of the Cold War, the defense sector has been characterized by high concentration and dependence on government contracts. The symbol of the new era became the so-called Last Supper, during which Americans decided to consolidate the defense sector to just 5 entities, the so-called defense primes. For comparison, in the 1950s, America had over 50 companies of comparable scale. The decline in defense spending and lower competition resulting from a dense network of dependencies and long-term military contracts created high entry barriers, which led the defense sector into stagnation that, according to many, impacted the pace of technological progress and adaptive capability. Statistics seem to confirm this phenomenon. Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, RTX, and Northrop Grumman are in the top 10 private beneficiaries of American public spending. In total, the 5 largest American military companies received nearly $300 billion annually from the Pentagon alone, both for research and development and under signed contracts. Simultaneously, according to estimates, defense primes obtain over 85% of Pentagon funds designed for companies in the sector. Another problem was the difficulty in adapting to new realities after the collapse of the USSR and the resulting change in operational needs of North Atlantic Alliance countries toward expeditionary missions. A flagship example of a long-term Pentagon military contract characterized by chronic deadline shifts and cost increases is the 5th generation F-35 fighter program, which began back in 1990. The entire project has been delayed by 10 years in total and is expected to cost the Pentagon up to $2 trillion over the lifetime of the fighters. It is worth noting that the F-35 accounts for about 1/4 of Lockheed's revenue. A comparable example is the order for 100 new generation B-21 stealth bombers, which is estimated to cost the American taxpayer as much as $200 billion. However, nature abhors a vacuum, and on the fertile ground of a robust venture capital sector, strong competition is growing against the Big Five. The symbol of the new wave of innovation aimed at crumbling the current status quo in the defense sector is the American Palantir, which began operations in 2004 on the wave of the wars on terror. Interestingly, the CIA was for many years both a main client and investor in Palantir through its technology fund In-Q-Tel. What exactly does Palantir do? Put simply, it sees patterns where the human mind perceives only chaos. The main application of the American company's breakthrough software concerns more efficient data aggregation in organizations in one integrated platform. Palantir's programs are primarily based on data ontology, thus modeling and creating knowledge systems, information management, and designing interactive systems in organizations. Additionally, the company develops digital twin technology, which has applications in most sectors of the economy, particularly in industry. Palantir's technologies find broad applications beyond military systems, as evidenced by collaborations in optimizing Britain's NHS during the COVID pandemic. Furthermore, the company provides its services in the automotive, financial, and energy sectors. For example, BP uses the software to manage resource assets and oil extraction from offshore deposits. Currently, the commercial sector accounts for almost half of the company's revenue. The dual-use nature of the technology has led the company to develop 2 separate operating systems for the public and private sectors. For many years, Palantir has closely collaborated with American intelligence agencies, such as the CIA, NSA, and FBI, as well as special forces. Importantly, Palantir does not sell its products to China or clients from countries considered geopolitical rivals of the USA. After years of operating away from the spotlight, in 2024, largely on the way of Donald Trump's victory, the company's valuation soared by over 300%, exceeding the combined capitalization of the rest of the defense sector in the USA. The uniqueness of this situation is confirmed by the fact that for the previous 46 years, no defense company had joined the S&P 500 index. Additionally, it is worth noting that founder Alex Karp, more frequently than in the case of other technology companies, emphasizes the importance of organizational culture and Palantir's mission based on patriotism and supporting the armed forces both in times of peace and war. Another American success story is the rapid development of Anduril, responsible for creating software systems and unmanned vessels for the military. In 2025, the company plans to raise $2.5 billion at a valuation of $28 billion. Recently, the startup expanded its business to include the production of rocket propulsion systems. Moreover, it is also working on autonomous vessel projects for Australia and is considering building a drone factory in Great Britain. This demonstrates the large military contracts are no longer exclusively the domain of the largest companies in the sector. The Pentagon recognizes the value of the private sector and simultaneously attempts to adapt to the new battlefield through developing asymmetric capabilities and mass digitalization of military systems. The change in approach is demonstrated by, among other things, the procurement plans of the US Marines and Navy, which focus on greater force dispersion and abandonment of heavy and costly units such as tanks or cruisers. This trend is visible in some Pentagon military programs, like Replicator, concerning drone swarms. To date, over 500 companies have participated in the program, and 30 have received contracts. Importantly, up to 75% of the involved companies supplying components operate in civilian sectors. Meanwhile, in the land domain, the US Army is opting for innovative anti-drone solutions in the form of microwave weapons created by Epirus. The variability in military needs and the resulting scale of challenges facing the defense sector have for decades promoted collaboration and fusion of technologies from the stage of developing new systems to mass production and the implementation process for the armed forces. In recent years, the wave of collaboration, also between smaller players, is a derivative of the growing digitalization of the battlefield and the dramatic acceleration in the pace of innovation, as indicated by the Russian-Ukrainian war. In the USA, long dominated by an oligopoly of the largest defense companies, a new trend can also be observed in the dimension of industrial partnerships. One of the most evident examples is the collaboration between Anduril and General Dynamics, which jointly won a contract for the development and production of new unmanned vessels as part of the Unmanned Vehicle Program for the US Air Force, specifically the Collaborative Combat Aircraft. Beating offers from Lockheed Martin or Boeing, the drones are to be used in conjunction with the new generation NGAD fighter. Beyond the mentioned contract, Anduril has also entered into an agreement with OpenAI to improve anti-drone technologies. Meanwhile, Palantir decided to collaborate with another startup, Shield AI, concerning joint command and control systems, C2, as well as the development of unmanned vessel autonomy. New solutions will utilize the breakthrough operating system developed by Palantir, along with artificial intelligence technology from Shield AI. Palantir has also decided to integrate its technology into Anduril's products. Therefore, American defense tech companies led by Palantir, SpaceX, and Anduril plan to establish a consortium aimed at facilitating the receipt of military contracts, attempting to limit the position of the 5 dominant defense companies, which have been responsible for the vast majority of Pentagon orders since the 1990s. In June 2024, Palantir, along with 11 other companies and investors, sent an open letter to the Pentagon, calling for support of private enterprises seeking military contracts. Looking from a broader perspective, Palantir considers itself a main advocate for reform of the military procurement system and the structure of the entire defense sector. Alluding to Martin Luther's Reformation, Palantir published its own thesis for defense reformation in the USA, serving as a kind of organizational manifesto. The document emphasized the negative impact of sector consolidation dependent on single-source contracts. It also compared the current situation with the Cold War period, when the lion's share of the defense budget went to enterprises operating in both civilian and military markets. Interestingly, in China, where the so-called dual circulation model and civil-military fusion are popular, defense companies obtain up to 40% of revenues from civilian sectors. The abandonment of supporting commercial technologies caused stagnation in the sector and, according to many, waste of public funds. The main culprits were said to be cost-plus contracts which do not impose specific deadlines, and thus not creating incentives to increase efficiency or complete projects faster. Palantir's vision is shared by L3Harris Technologies, one of the larger weapons manufacturers in the USA. The companies have entered into a strategic partnership, calling for reform of the Pentagon's procurement procedure. Particular attention was drawn to the need for facilitating the reporting process and organizing joint orders with other companies. These postulates, at least in theory, are shared by the new administration. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, in one of his first statements, addressed Silicon Valley directly, appealing for support of defense technologies. In his view, technological advantage is to constitute the main source of competitiveness for American manufacturers. Besides traditional companies like RTX, Boeing or Lockheed Martin, or startups, Pentagon contracts are increasingly being awarded to technology giants, such as Amazon, Google, Microsoft or Oracle. For example, the latter is to handle the supply of AR goggles and build cloud infrastructure for the Pentagon. This shows that growing defense budgets are attracting the attention of companies primarily focused on civilian technologies. A serious obstacle to reforms, though, may be Congress, whose approval is required when changing budget plans. For years, its representatives have advocated maintaining the status quo due to the desire to protect industrial production in individual states that are dependent on long-term military contracts. The situation is also interesting on the other side of the Atlantic. However, in Europe, the higher risk market is traditionally a problem. Therefore, the only European unicorn, a company valued at least $1 billion in the defense technology sector, is the German Helsing, which last year raised 450 million euros for further development, reaching a valuation of 5 billion euros. It's worth noting the strategic partnership of the German company established with another European gem, the French Mistral, operating in the AI area. Helsing is also active in Ukraine, where it produces HX-2 combat drones, with a range of 100 kilometers and resistance to electromagnetic interference. The HX-2 is intended to provide a cheaper alternative to precision missiles and rocket artillery. Thanks to the use of technology in Ukraine, the German startup has significantly accelerated the software update process for the effectiveness of drone use. CEO Thorsten Riehl openly speaks about the vision of creating a precision mass of combat drones. In Ukraine alone, the German manufacturer has committed to delivering 6,000 unmanned vessels. Meanwhile, in the maritime domain, Helsing has ambitions to replace frigates with surface drones, USVs, which for many months have been successful in the Black Sea, effectively neutralizing Russia's advantage in the form of large surface vessels. Other interesting startup examples include the French Command AI, engaged in creating C2 command platforms, or the German ARX Robotics. Most companies focus on creating software for drones, methods of countering them, as well as new AI solutions in command systems or military data analysis. The area of robotics is also interesting, which beyond the battlefield itself has great potential for transforming production processes. An important European project requiring advanced industrial collaboration is the next-generation fighter concept, Future Combat Air System (FCAC). Consisting of 7 separate technological pillars, the project has engaged the largest defense companies in Europe, such as Airbus, Dassault Aviation, and the Spanish Indra. Simultaneously, due to the use of new technologies, the FCAS program has been expanded to include the German Helsing, which will be responsible for developing artificial intelligence technology used in the fighter. This example and the role given to the German company demonstrate the growing importance of defense tech companies and the resulting direct participation in projects led by the largest entities in the defense sector. It should be added that even before the last financing round in 2022, Helsing signed a strategic partnership with the German defense giant Rheinmetall. Despite these examples, the fact is that Europe still lags behind in terms of startup financing scale. This phenomenon applies to the entire private market, both venture capital and private equity, which for many years have determined the financial advantage of the USA. In recent years, the USA has seen up to 4 times more funding rounds and of a significantly larger scale than in the old continent. As recently as 2023, VC funds in Europe reportedly had only 3 billion euros available for investments in the defense tech area, up to 10 times less than in the USA. It should therefore not be surprising that most prospering European startups requiring support, counted in hundreds of millions of euros, sign agreements with American, not European, investors. Nevertheless, recent years have brought an acceleration of investments in defense technologies worldwide. McKinsey, in their analysis, states that between 2018 and 2023, over 800 new funding rounds involving defense tech companies were conducted in the USA. For comparison, from 2011 to 2017, there were almost half as many similar rounds. The biggest jump was recorded in 2022, largely in response to the outbreak of Russia's war with Ukraine. Throughout 2024, investments in defense tech and dual-use companies amounted to $31 billion, increasing by over 1/3 compared to the previous year. Of the total sum, as much as $12 billion was directed to startups from the AI sector. Despite the clear advantage of Americans, between 2018 and 2024, European VC funds increased the level of financing for defense companies by as much as 5-fold. According to data from NIF and Dealroom, investments in European defense tech companies increased by 24% year-over-year in 2024, reaching $5.2 billion. Importantly, this was a reverse trend compared to the entire VC sector in Europe, which in the face of high interest rates recorded a decline. The pace of innovation is also driving the creation of increasingly new funds. Examples include RTX Ventures from Raytheon, CIA-affiliated InQtel, or Lockheed Martin Ventures. The largest American VC funds such as Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia Capital, which for decades have focused exclusively on civilian-purpose technologies, are also investing in startups. A flagship example is the investment in Mach Industries, which is engaged in the production of hydrogen-powered unmanned vehicles and the development of hypersonic propulsion. Despite being in an early development phase, the company is also building its own self-sufficient production lines, securing contracts from the US Army. Meanwhile, in Europe, interest in the sector is confirmed by the establishment of the French Airbus Ventures, the new Estonian fund SmartCap, or the British Strategic Fund. Also in Poland, plans are being made to create the Polish Defense Fund, which will focus on defense technologies as well as dual-use applications in other sectors of the economy. In the Pentagon, development and promotion of military technologies has been handled for almost a decade by the Defense Innovation Unit, which works closely with the private sector. In 2023, DIU was subordinated directly to the Secretary of Defense, which significantly improved its status, reducing dependence on Pentagon bureaucracy. The institution's budget in 2024 amounted to over $980 million, and so far it has successfully mediated the conclusion of over 400 military contracts. It is viewed by many experts as a model of state institution supporting private enterprises. From the perspective of transatlantic relations, it is worth emphasizing that NATO has also intensified efforts in this area, long before the outbreak of the full-scale war in Ukraine. Already in 2019, key defense technologies were identified and appropriate development strategies were implemented. 2 years later, an innovation accelerator, Diana, was established, whose main goal is to strengthen the relationship between armed forces and universities and the private sector, as well as support startups. As part of Diana, NATO also provides infrastructure for testing technologies. In 2023, the NATO Innovation Fund was launched, the first multinational VC fund focused on defense technologies. NIF's mission is strategic investments in startups from the deep tech sector, requiring greater capital support than traditional businesses. The fund manages a total of 1 billion euros collected from member states' contributions, and interestingly, did not receive support from the United States and France. Since July 2024, the implementation of a roadmap for cooperation between NATO and Ukraine in the area of military innovations has also been underway. This initiative is supported by a number of European defense conglomerates and startups. The plan includes, among other things, a lessons learned program and enabling experimentation and testing of new technologies in combat conditions. Direct support is also provided to Brave One, that is the innovation center of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, which serves as a link between enterprises and military units. Beyond activities within the alliance, in Europe the largest economies such as France or Germany continuously support their own startups through the use of state development funds, offering financing in tens of billions of euros. Other industrialized countries such as the UK or Japan have decided to establish new military innovation agencies for better integration of armed forces with the private sector. An interesting example is the Cyber Innovation Hub operating at the German Bundeswehr, enabling the testing of technologies in military units before the commercialization stage and securing military contracts. Despite these institutional efforts, defense R&D spending in the European part of NATO is still exceptionally low, averaging 5% of defense budget, thus relatively even 3 times less than in the USA, where over $150 billion was allocated for these purposes in the last year, which is 55% more than 5 years earlier. According to one report, the defense innovation ecosystem in Europe would need at least 5 years to catch up with America. The long-term lack of investment has also impacted production capabilities, a good example being the EU's largest economy, which despite a developed industrial base, is capable of producing fewer than 100 tanks annually. Indeed, defense budgets in Europe have been continuously growing since 2014, yet they are still 1/3 lower than at the beginning of the 1990s. Experts indicate that beyond increasing the size of military contracts, the recipe could be actively supporting public-private partnerships, greater acceptance of mergers and acquisitions in the sector, implementation of a common industrial strategy, or joint procurement. In this latter field, European states are beginning to cooperate more closely, particularly those fearing the Russian Federation. Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway have decided to consolidate ammunition purchases. These same states, without Norway, but with the participation of Poland, Great Britain, and the Netherlands, are considering the idea of establishing a supranational bank, created specifically for the joint purchase of weapons and cutting procurement costs. According to Politico, the finance ministers of these countries secretly gathered in February to discuss this issue at a meeting organized by the Polish Ministry of Finance. Moreover, for many years, even after 2014, a significant barrier in Europe has been ethical issues, and those related to ESG, referring to environment, society, and corporate governance. These were often used by European investors as an excuse against supporting defense technologies. In recent months, leading political parties from Germany, France, or the UK have announced reforms of regulations hampering investments in defense. Data collected by Financial Times indicates that as many as 60% of funds in the EU still have guidelines encompassing sustainable development and environmental protection issues, which indirectly impact the size of investments in defense technologies. The biggest losers of the system for years have been mainly small enterprises and startups, which rely on financing from private markets. And thus, this is one of the main obstacles on the path to transforming European armed forces. And finally, no less important, an inherent problem of the EU is the strong fragmentation of the industry and lack of will for technological exchange, which is primarily explained by the desire to maintain competitive advantages of national champions. This phenomenon is best confirmed by the numbers. On the old continent, as many as 62 types of land vehicles and 47 types of naval vessels are still in use. In the face of increased demand for armaments and ammunition, a number of representatives of European defense companies, such as Thales, Rheinmetall or Airbus, have called for sector consolidation. Recent months have brought new announcements of industrial cooperation. A good example is the initiative bringing together Airbus, Thales and Leonardo, which aims to enable competition with American SpaceX. Joint venture undertakings are also becoming popular, where an example is the drone construction project between Leonardo and the Turkish Baykar, manufacturer of Bayraktar drones. Europe's greatest success in this field remains the French-Italian-British conglomerate MBDA, primarily engaged in building precision missiles such as Storm Shadow or Scalp. Another problem remains dependence on armament imports, which amounts to about 50% of total European defense spending. As much as 1/3 of the money is spent on equipment and technology originating from the USA, including main combat platforms such as fighters or air defense systems. Suffice it to say that over half of the fighters in European fleets come from America. Since the beginning of conflicts, technological progress has decided the fate of individual battles, wars, or entire civilizations. The use of military innovations throughout history has played a significant role, influencing the cycle of the rise and fall of powers. Relying on technological advantage over numerical has permanently characterized the Western approach to warfare, the so-called Western way of war, since the mid-20th century. Currently, as the global balance of power enters a multipolar era, military innovations have become the preferred mode of competition for smaller states seeking asymmetric means of combat, striking at the potential that for decades has formed the foundation of American hegemony. Another important dynamic is the growing interdependence between progress in civilian and military technologies, which often complement each other in new battlefield systems and frequently blur the line between peace and war. We stand at a crossroads in history, where the boundaries between civilian and military technologies are increasingly blurred. This convergence is not accidental. It's the effect of a new approach to defense innovations, in which technology startups fill the gap left by traditional defense conglomerates. Palantir, Anduril, Helsing, and dozens of smaller players are not only changing the structure of the defense industry, but most importantly, radically transforming the battlefield itself. Ukraine has become a living laboratory for these transformations, where the effectiveness of drones, reconnaissance systems, and artificial intelligence has been verified in real conflict conditions. What is particularly important, the difference between Europe and America in the approach to financing military startups may decide the future balance of power. While the Pentagon actively integrates new technologies, Europe still struggles with industry fragmentation and regulations that hamper innovation. History teaches us that those who recognize the potential of new technologies and effectively implement them gain not only military but also economic advantage. The question is, who will better understand and utilize this new wave of digital transformation in the military domain? Because in an era when algorithms can decide the outcomes of conflicts and startups dethrone defense giants, the ability to adapt becomes the most valuable currency in the geopolitical game.